This week on Great Chat, are you joining a new startup? We're here to break down equity, what those acronyms mean. A quick reminder, each week we answer your questions. Don't forget to submit them at anothergreatchat.com.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another week of Great Chat.
Hi. I feel like news is like dumping this week. Angela, where are you and what are you watching this week? I feel like there's a lot of big milestone moves here.
I am in the windy city of Chicago right now for ProMat, which is one of the largest warehouse automation and robotics conferences. And I was in the conference walking the floor, and in the middle of it all was a giant US flag, and it really made me think of Mac's comment that we're all about US flags now, and size really matters.
I was going to say, does anyone here have a little US flag in their Twitter bio? Because that seems to be very popular these days.
Mac?
Patriotism super hot right now. No, I actually don't, but I do have a massive US flag featuring all of my favorite Olympics moments as my Twitter background, which I, put some really great work in on Apple Preview to make.
Sally, did I see that NBC just bought the rights to the Olympics for?
No. It's just an extension, but there was a little bit of a new addition to it where the Olympic Committee would benefit from investments that Comcast did. So we've always been into sports, and we're doubling down in sports and innovation, which is kind of exciting.
The other headline for me that is somewhat sad as someone that grew up shopping at Forever 21. I don't know if any.
Oh my gosh, my college fashion is horrible.
I feel like it died such a slower death than I thought it would, though. Right?
But it's filing for bankruptcy a second time, not even the first time, but for a second time. It's just been a slow, painful decline, which is really sad. That was where all the going out tops were from in the college.
Okay, so obviously there's a shit ton of news this week, and some of it is unbelievable. We have to talk about Deal versus Rippling, and we will get there. But I figure something happened in the last couple of weeks in my universe, and we don't talk about my universe very much. We talk about a lot of AI, but I've been, as anyone who has read my deeply unhinged Twitter bio would know, I've been in the what I like to call the greater American dynamism cinematic universe for a little while now. Started my career at Palantir, and then am now at a company called Hadrian, where we are automating and reindustrializing the United States and bringing back a lot of manufacturing jobs. It's epic. I'm obsessed with it. But in aerospace a couple of weeks ago, we had the very first commercial space flight to land on the moon via Firefly. Huge, massive accomplishment. First commercial footage of the moon from space. And it's a really exciting time in this corner of the universe.
Normally, you could never follow any of that with enterprise software, but this might be the 1 week. There is an exception. We're recording this on a Monday, so the Deal and Rippling drama just dropped. I'm sure everyone here has seen, but maybe I'll give a little bit of a recap in case folks haven't. So Parker Conrad, the founder and CEO of Rippling, which is an HR tech company, tweeted today a lawsuit against Deal, another company in the HR tech space, alleging corporate espionage, which is kind of as fun as it gets in enterprise software drama. For context, these are the two biggest venture-backed startups in the space. I looked. Deal is valued at $12.6 billion most recently, Rippling at $13.5 billion, so neck and neck, at least from a valuation perspective. And the lawsuit is a wild read. So allegedly, Deal hired or recruited a Rippling employee in Ireland to access confidential Rippling information and share it with Deal. And apparently this person did thousands of searches in Rippling's internal systems, including Slack. And Rippling got wind of this or was suspicious. And so they laid a trap for him, also known as a honeypot. They sent It's so wild because what
They sent a little honey trap, like they sent
Yes,
a
this is like HR SaaS espionage. This is like
Oh
as
my
exciting as
gosh.
it gets in the B2B SaaS world.
And the honeypot was a Slack channel named D
Oh.
Defectors, which is hilarious.
well,
And
and it was
also what I like to call it when I'm not
Okay.
dating.
And it was clever too because I think what they were trying to prove with this was not just that this person was like doing unauthorized things, but that it was like at the highest level of Deal's leadership that the like instructions were coming from. And so the honeypot started with like a letter to, I forgot, like Deal's like chief legal officer and CFO, flagging this channel where apparently, Rippling employees were talking about all of these like really bad things that Deal employees were doing, and it would be like a PR risk and a reputational risk. And so instantly the employee in question is suddenly searching Slack for D defectors, this channel that like had never existed before, and like boom, they got him, or at least the lawsuit paints a pretty compelling picture. The last detail that is like kind of damning and hilarious is that apparently when confronted with the court order, the employee went and hid in the bathroom, which is generally not like the best sign of innocence.
But he did get served at the end, right?
But then also ran, right? But then also they were able to get away. Is that the last?
Oh my
detail?
gosh, I
That they,
haven't heard
fled
that part of
successfully?
this.
Yeah, at large. So
That
funny.
reminds me of after Uber and Didi settled their feud in China, they like looked at employee um, like logs, and there were like 80 people that were on the payrolls of both companies. And the conclusion after that was like, oh, there were only 80 people that were like corporate espionaging between these two companies, not more.
It's crazy. I mean, there also was the Waymo and Uber lawsuit that settled for 245 million, I guess back in 2018 or whenever that was. So there's a little bit of a track record here. I think it is an interesting question. Obviously, if the lawsuit, if what Rippling alleges is true, this is pretty egregious. But like, I think there's a big gray area for like, competitive information gathering. I mean, absolutely companies, sign up as fake customers to get a look at like what the product demos are and what the roadmap is. And I guess in this case, it got really out of hand.
Something that caught my eye is, of course, the Klarna IPO. So Klarna is a buy now, pay later sort of layaway for today, a competitor to Affirm. And I think, Klarna has been a big fintech player, and we've been kind of anticipating this IPO. And I think if you're in the fintech space or been watching these markets, like this is a big deal because, fintech's been kind of out for the last, year and a half, 2 years. I just read this morning that they won Walmart's business away from Affirm, and Affirm's stock price dropped. So it feels like, I don't want to say fintech is fully back, baby, but this is a good sign.
Should we get into our big topic for the week?
Yeah, let's do it.
You mean it wasn't honeypot traps?
Whole episode just on honeypots.
Okay, so this week's episode is all about startup equity, and I think it was inspired by Mira Maruti's new company, Thinking Machine Labs. And Mira was the former CTO over at OpenAI. And I think as one of her ways to recruit a lot of the employees is she's giving out equity at pre-409A valuation, so at a very low to nothing strike price. Angela, maybe you can first explain some of the mechanics or thinking behind all of this, and then I think we all have various experiences that we can also share as well.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because Mira is someone that had been at OpenAI for a really long time. Back when Sam was ousted by the board, I think she was the one that took over the interim CEO role, if I remember correctly. So someone that has a very significant role in creating that company, and she is starting her own company. And I think we've all seen that there's been a huge proliferation of AI companies. And one of the hardest things for all these companies to do is source talent. So everyone's trying to find some edge in how they recruit the best talent. And so I think this is a really interesting approach that she's taken. What I understand is she's essentially offered employees options at a very low strike price, so the cost that you have to pay to exercise those options. And she's also letting employees exercise those options early. So before the 409A report, which sets the valuation of the company, and before a funding round happens, that actually crystallizes the value, which as someone who's never exercised stock options before, I don't fully understand, but I think is a very positive thing. So I'm curious how that resonates with the rest of you.
From a couple steps back, it's always been, when I remember reading about this when you guys sent this over, and I think it's pretty unprecedented, right? Like, I don't think that this has ever been done before. And the reason being is that it's just incredibly generous to early employees. Like, I've never been
I
in
think
a
it's also, we've never seen like a jump from a company with no value to a valuation of like $20 billion. One experience I had was at a company I was working at before I started Rave. I was negotiating my equity with my CFO, and I was given a certain amount of strike price and a certain amount of shares. So I was evaluating my entire comp, including cash and equity, and obviously leaning towards more on the equity side. The company I was working at, we were a Series B company. And in the middle of our negotiation, we were raising a Series C. And so, but I wasn't aware of that. And so when I joined the company, I was issued my shares and then realized my strike price almost had doubled. And what I found out from that experience is actually not, you don't have to legally as a company tell you what the strike price is if there's, confidential information. However, I also think that when you are joining a company full time and you're going to be with a company for a while, it's not really a great start. I will say credit to the CEO. He did correct that information. I actually didn't end up exercising them because it was too high of a price for me. And I don't know what the numbers, I know it was like floating around our group chat. I don't think a lot of people do exercise at certain levels of various companies.
Yeah, I think I read that Carta report that was posted on LinkedIn. It said something like 50% of vested options are returned to the company, meaning people choose not to exercise them.
Dropbox and Facebook, I joined, I think Series D. So it was RSUs at that point. But Quora and Plaid, it was a mix of Ensos, ISOs, and I did fully exercise. I think I exercised like 1 year at a time. And I think the first thing I want to say is if I didn't have exits from Dropbox and Facebook, I don't think I would have been able to, be in the position to even early exercise. So I often think of like people early in their career who don't have that experience and don't have complete information, but also just don't have access to the cash to be able to early exercise. And of course, Quora and Plaid are still around and they're doing great, but I early exercised in 2016, 17, and they still haven't exited, right? And so I don't do the math, just for self-preservation reasons, but let's say I put that money into Bitcoin or the S&P 500, right? So when people are always early exercise, yeah, I don't have any regrets, but I feel like what this company is doing is they're really facing the reality that companies are staying private longer than ever, and that your equity is a part of your total compensation. And I think that we don't have any great very, very recent stories like we did 10 years ago of early employees cashing out their equity. And so the farther and farther we get from that time, right, which really drove up housing prices in the Bay Area, we really have to put a real today dollar value on this very illiquid part of your compensation.
I think to your earlier point too, I also early exercised when I was at Brex, and mine was a lot later than 2017, 2018. So, but it's still painful to have that massively illiquid asset. I remember too, both there and other places, like when I was at Palantir before we were public, I knew folks in that heady ZERP era that were doing something that I think now you really only hear founders doing, which is borrowing against your equity holdings. And that had made it all the way down to just rank and file employees like myself. I was, especially when I was at Palantir, especially when I started, I was pretty junior. So I didn't have anywhere near enough equity to make sense borrowing, to going and taking out a loan against. But those were pretty common. And I know some people who are stuck on the hook for those with this asset that's like not going to be liquid anytime soon. So thankful a bit for a return to slightly more normalcy, but it's also, again, just a really interesting prospect, especially in these days of AI where the valuations are so high and where individual equity grants can be so large. It's interesting.
I mean, I'll say I was lucky with Box because it was my first startup job. I had no idea. Like, I negotiated for like a couple thousand more dollars in cash comp. I didn't even know how to think about equity. I was also joining pretty junior, but then did get subsequent grants. I exercised a tiny portion of my stock just because I didn't have a lot of cash. I was in my like mid 20s when I did that. And then ultimately, I bought the rest of my options or RSUs after the company went public. That was tough too, though, because I had to sell shares to buy them, and it was at the low point for the stock. So, like things I would do differently with hindsight all the way through, to the point of not being able to afford to buy your options. So, at Glossier, when I left, I didn't know what I was going to do next. I was maybe going to take some time, write a book, do some consulting. I ended up starting a fund. And I'm glad that I decided not to put like all my cash into buying those options, because turns out that I've needed that for GP commit and just like, paying rent. And so I went down a path of exploring what the financing options were if you didn't want to buy your shares outright. And so I used SecFi. And essentially what it is it's I guess like a no fault loan. Like if Glossier, if Glossier were to go to zero, I own all my options, and I wouldn't have they put up the entire amount to both buy them and then pay the taxes on top of that. What they get in return is a portion of that equity in the event of an exit, and there's like interest on that loan. And so it was a good option. It's not an option that's available to everyone. I was lucky that I did that transaction when like the market was still okay. And very shortly after, this was like summer 2021, a lot of the growth stage company valuation started to be called more into question. And I think that's where the business model for something like that kind of falls apart. But there are options. It's a really tough call. And I wish what companies would do is to extend the exercise window. I mean, there are lots of reasons why that's complicated, but the default is, 3 months. And that's tricky for a lot of people, especially if you're making a decision that, maybe you didn't plan for a year or half a year.
Yeah, even in the RSU part, when we were thinking about issuing our equity for my last startup, we had an option between RSUs and RSAs. So RSAs, restricted stock awards, versus units. And when I at the time when I was offered those, I didn't even know that RSAs existed. So anyways, should we head over to our rapid fire questions? Mac, take it away.
Okay, fantastic. This Q&A is brought to you by Mercury, the fintech used by over 200,000 startups to simplify their finances. And our first question is, how do you feel about CRM tools? I'm laughing because I hate them.
Is there any other way to feel about CRM tools?
There are CRM that anyone actually enjoys using. Like, I do think that Salesforce just feels sort of like a necessary evil. At every single company I've ever worked at, we've had some version. I'm not sure if that's true about Palantir. I'd have to double check. We were in a different stage. What sectors are still underfunded or underinvested in? I will hand this over to our resident VC investor here, Angela.
I think everyone has been so down on consumer lately.
Yes, I was going to say the same thing.
I think that I don't know if this will hold true, but my hope is that AI will help drive like a renaissance in consumer, whether that's consumer hardware or consumer apps. But hopefully people find really cool ways to build products that are useful and that people like.
I agree. I feel like for a while, everyone was pivoting away from consumer, and there's some really cool applications being built right now.
I would love that. I feel like the vibes on every single consumer platform or social network are so rancid right now. I would really love, I don't know if that's just us as a society being obnoxious and awful, or if it's like the platforms themselves, but I would love to go somewhere that's like a little bit happier. than every platform I feel like I'm on. Okay. And then finally, what technological advancements do you think will have the most profound impact on everyday life in the next 5 to 10 years? Ideally with as much specificity as possible.
Ooh.
Ooh, well, this one, I was just thinking about this because I took my son, who is 4.5, to his classmate's house for dinner, and we took the bus there because he's obsessed with public transit. But then, by the time we were leaving, it was dark and cold outside. And so he was like, I want to take a Waymo home. And it's just so funny to me that he's like 4.5 and like his instinctual answer is like Waymo.
I would say the other one is I know we were going to maybe consider talking about it in our first part of this podcast, but Apple with their AirPods going into auto translation.
Oh.
I think as someone who's like grown, what do you think I was going to say, Mag?
I just thought you were going to say Apple AirPods, and I was like, okay.
Tim Apple?
Oh,
No, and the idea that, and like my mom, for example, she speaks English, but she doesn't speak it well, and you can have real-time conversation with like anyone in the world.
I've been challenged with bringing the cool podcaster energy. Thank you for listening to Another Great Chat. Have questions for us? Make sure to submit them at anothergreatchat.com. See you next week.